It is the year 805 CE. The Norse world stands on the edge of change. Within the valleys of Norway, among the rocky shores of Denmark and Sweden, whispers of new horizons stir the imagination. Here, in the land of the midnight sun, the sea has always been both an enemy and a friend, a barrier and a bridge. And now it calls once more. For generations, these northern people lived between forest and fjord, hunting, farming, trading. But the land was limited and families grew large. The seas beyond offered more than fish, they offered destiny. This is the moment the Viking Age truly began. The first voyages beyond the fjords. To understand the first Viking explorers, we must look at what drove them to the edge of the known world. Scandinavia in the early 9th century was not a united kingdom, but a patchwork of tribes and jarldoms. Resources were scarce, arable land was precious, winters unforgiving, and disputes over inheritance often turned brother against brother. But the Vikings were adaptable. They learned to see the sea not as emptiness, but as opportunity, a road that connected worlds. They had already traded amber, furs, and iron across the Baltic Sea with the Franks and the Slavs. But by 805 CE, curiosity turned westward, toward the islands and coastlines whispered about by sailors, the lands of the Angles, the Saxons, and the monks. None of this would have been possible without the Viking longship. Light, flexible, and fast, it was the ultimate vessel for a restless people. Constructed from oak and bound by iron rivets, its hull was designed to flex with the waves. Its shallow keel allowed it to glide through rivers as easily as it crossed open seas. And its dragon-headed prow was more than decoration. It was a symbol of protection, meant to ward off spirits that lingered at the edges of the world. A single ship could hold 40 men and weeks of provisions. With oars for calm seas and sails for strong winds, it was both a war machine and a vessel of discovery. The longship was the Norseman's wings, the tool that made an empire of the sea possible. And so they set sail. From the coast of Rogaland in Norway to the islands off the Shetlands, small crews embarked on journeys into the unknown. The North Sea was treacherous. Winds shifted without warning. Fog could swallow ships whole, and waves could rise taller than the mast. But the Norse knew the sea's language. They read cloud patterns, the behavior of whales, and the direction of ocean currents. At night, they followed the stars, the Norderstjerne, the North Star, their constant guide. Each successful voyage brought back new knowledge, the position of islands, the taste of foreign waters, and the memory of unfamiliar coasts. Soon, the islands north of Britain became familiar ground, the Orkneys, the Shetlands, the Hebrides, stepping stones to the wider world. The earliest encounters were not always violent. Some Norsemen traded fish and furs for grain and tools with local peoples, the Picts and Gaels of the Northern Isles. Others married into local clans, their bloodlines mingling into what would one day become Norse Gaelic communities. But the allure of wealth was impossible to ignore. From captured traders and whispered rumors, they learned of places filled with treasure, monasteries standing alone on the coast, where gold and silver sat unguarded under the care of men of peace. To a seafaring people who valued courage and reward, this was an irresistible call. Small bands of warriors struck quickly, looting coastal settlements before vanishing back into the sea. To the Christian chroniclers of the time, these attacks were acts of godless savagery. But to the Norse, they were practical and even honorable. Raids brought prestige, wealth, and stories that would live forever in saga and song. Gold chalices, jeweled crosses, fine cloth. They became the treasures of the North, fueling both ambition and legend. Yet, to imagine the Vikings only as raiders is to miss the greater story. By the early 9th century, they had become traders, settlers, and explorers. They founded seasonal camps along Ireland's eastern shores, early versions of what would become Dublin, Wexford, and Waterford. Trade flowed between the Norse and their neighbours. Fish, amber, ivory, slaves, and weapons exchanged for silver, wine, and silk. In time, these markets grew into permanent towns, Norse strongholds that became gateways of commerce and culture across Europe. The Vikings had discovered something far more powerful than conquest: connection. Life aboard a longship was harsh and uncertain. Crewmen slept shoulder to shoulder under animal skins, often soaked by rain and sea spray. They ate dried fish and barley flatbread, and drank rainwater caught in buckets. But life at sea forged loyalty stronger than iron. Every man was part of a living machine. One misstep could mean death for all. Songs, stories, and rituals filled the long nights, and the bonds formed on these voyages became the foundation of future colonies abroad. To the Norse, these voyages were not just journeys, they were tests set by the gods. Odin demanded wisdom and sacrifice. Thor offered protection against storms and enemies, and Freya watched over love, fertility, and the promise of safe return. Before sailing, captains made offerings, sometimes an animal, sometimes silver, sometimes their own blood. For to defy the sea without honor to the gods was to court destruction. Their faith was the compass that kept courage steady when the stars disappeared behind clouds. By 805 CE, the Norse had established a network of outposts from the Faroe Islands to the coasts of Ireland and northern Britain. Each voyage mapped the unknown piece by piece, creating the first Norse maritime world. These explorers brought back more than silver and goods. They returned with ideas, new farming tools, new building styles, new languages. Through trade and exchange, the Norse world began to change. Their once isolated fjords were now linked to a vast and interconnected North Sea economy. These early voyages marked the transformation of a people. They were no longer confined by mountains or the limits of their land. The ocean had become their empire. Within a generation, these same explorers would reach Iceland, Greenland, and even the shores of North America, centuries before others dared the open sea. But in 805 CE, it all began with courage, hunger, and the whisper of waves against the hull. The first voyages beyond the fjords were not conquests of land. They were conquests of fear, and through them the Norse claimed something far greater, their place in history.